Welcome to My Body, My Bump, My Baby, where we help women be empowered, intentional mothers. This podcast is best enjoyed sipping tea or taking a stroll in nature. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be substituted for professional psychological or medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, midwife, or other qualified health provider with any questions about your personal situation, health, or medical condition. Welcome to another episode of My Body, My Bump, My Baby. Today we are talking about microbiome. You might have heard us talk a little bit about this in other podcasts, kind of sprinkling it in here and there and here and there. And maybe you have learned a little bit about that since, or maybe you have some questions, but we're going to dive into it a little bit today.
Absolutely. And B brings a lot of research that she's done from a self-health perspective. And I bring a lot of research that I've done also from my training. And so everything that I do with women when I'm working with them, we are focusing on the health of the microbiome. And I'm not going to give you 1,000 things to do, but there are tidbits that you can learn for yourself to then just think as you're going about your day and about your life of how this impacts your health.
Yeah.
So B has a really awesome definition of the microbiome that you've pulled from one of the books you've read that I'd love for you to share.
Yes. So, I've kind of been super obsessed with microbiome. And one of the books that I've read is called The Human Superorganism. Fantastic book. If you want to kind of take a deep dive, I would highly recommend it. So what is the microbiome? In the human, there are, now in this book they say 10,000, but I actually recently heard on another podcast that they found up to 40,000 in another project. Different microbial species in residence in a healthy person. And those could be like gut species, there's different species in the mouth, there's different species on the body, of the skin. There are different species in the vagina, and this is not just bacteria. I think because biome, I don't know, for me, I always go straight to bacteria, but it's not just bacteria. It is different species of bacteria, fungi, viruses, and even parasites. Ugh, heebie-jeebies.
That's a trigger word for a lot of people because that's like the biggest trend right now, I think, is, oh my gosh, you have a parasite. Parasites come down to whether your body can handle what you have or what you don't. And sometimes you can fight it off and sometimes you can't. And it often depends on the health of your microbiome.
Well, yes, exactly. So just like with anything in the microbiome, we want balance, right? And so parasites actually are a part of a healthy microbiome when in balance.
Let's talk about that balance a little bit more.
Yeah.
That word right there. Because we often think that if there's something like a virus, fungi, parasites, bacteria in our bodies, we need to get rid of it. I don't know where this came from, but I think it's often referred to now as the war on germs.
Yes.
It started, 90s?
Yeah, so the late 80s, early 90s. What happened is science got kind of smart and they started to identify these particular bacteria that seemed to be causing issues. One of the ones I remember when I was younger was they had figured out what causes ulcers, and it was Helicobacter pylori or H. pylori. And they were like, we got to get rid of this bacteria. It's so bad. It's causing the ulcers. And so that's what we did. So we gave antibiotics. We got rid of these bacteria. And then we started to find out that there were issues by doing that. And so the whole war against germs was kind of like that one little story where it was like, oh, these things are evil, that's when the whole craze with the hand sanitizers.
Antibacterial, antimicrobial,
yes.
Everything.
In your soap, your hand soaps, in your body soaps, in basically, like you said, in everything. We were just kill all the bacteria. They are super bad. And this is super interesting to me because I kind of watched this unfold as I grew up. But when I was growing up, some of the health issues that younger people are experiencing today were really not all that common. And it's just, for me, seeing so many young people having these really bad allergies or
eczema,
food
sensitivities,
lots of food sensitivities, or even older people. Like, when I say young, I'm talking like 30. I'm not necessarily babies, but 30-year-olds having really bad non-communicable diseases that they're suffering from. These things were just not that prevalent when I was growing up, and we just saw this massive increase where it's now today it's a very common, super common thing. And we can scientifically now go back and look at some of the things that have changed and kind of start pinpointing where we made some boo-boos.
Yeah, some boo-boos and just decision-making from a health perspective. Something that I just love to think about, you're saying it like very, very well, of like we didn't have these issues beforehand. And now if you go in for eczema or a skin allergy or something, you're typically given like a topical steroid or something to cover it up rather than heal it. And I think the microbiome is so amazing because it literally is making up, or it is what we are made up of on the inside. And so it only makes sense that if we want to heal these other issues that we have, we need to heal what's going on in our gut and in our microbiome and the various microbiomes we have in the body, all the way from like the inside out.
Yes.
Because we can't just put Band-Aids on everything.
Right.
Well, we can, it just won't solve a problem.
And that's what we're finding, right, is that we are trying to Band-Aid and fix or treat one particular thing. I'm going to treat eczema, this one particular thing. And what we find out is it's not really, I'm sure you see this a lot in your practice, it's not really this one particular thing. It's a whole system issue.
You need to uproot the issue.
Right.
Whether that's through, well, it needs to be through food changes, through
lifestyle
changes. There can be supplementary things in homeopathy that can help with that. But you absolutely can fix these things too, which is amazing.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about where the microbiome starts.
So this is also very interesting to me. When I first started in birth work, it was about 2012, is when I started to see some of this data being published by a team that was doing some research on newborns, and they were looking at the microbiome. And I honestly don't remember why they were looking at it, but they were.
In the early 2000s, maybe 1990s is when it really started getting big to look at it that way.
Just to look at it.
Yep.
So in 2012, they had just recently released some of the data that they collected, and they were still saying, this is still new and fresh, so it's not conclusive. But what they were finding were some things that were very interesting. What they were finding is sometimes newborns would be swabbed, and they would take a look at the microbiome, and they were trying to compare them to the parents. So the assumption was that they should kind of match the parents. And what they were finding was, in some cases, newborns had a microbiome that didn't look like mom and didn't look like partner. And they were a bit confused, and they were thinking, well, what is this microbiome? Like, where did the baby get this microbiome? And after some time, they found that it matched the microbiome of the hospital. For me, that's super scary.
Which babies matched the microbiome of the hospital, though?
So then, yes, they did find out some babies matched parents, some babies matched hospital. And they had to figure out, well, why is this? Why is this happening? And what they have found, and maybe I need to look into this, but it seems to me that we didn't know this before. But what they found is a woman who is birthing her baby vaginally, she secretes a lot of juices and fluids throughout this birthing process. And the mama is giving baby, it's called seeding. seeding of its initial microbiome as she pushes baby through the birth canal. And if that is left to sit, then those bacteria grow, and that bacteria that mom provides is eventually going to train the immune system. So when the babies did not go through the vaginal tract and they were born via cesarean, those were the babies who actually, their microbiome did not resemble the parents, but instead the microbiome resembled the hospital.
Which isn't just sterility. It is also all of the germs, viruses, bacteria, parasites, fungi that sits in a hospital.
Yes.
And anyone will tell you, like when I was in the hospital, one of my nurses, I got up out of bed with my bare feet and she goes, "Oh, honey, do not do that. Like you need to put your socks on. This is the dirtiest floor you will ever touch."
Right.
Great.
And there's some of the big uglies live in the hospital, right? There are certain type of bacteria and fungi and viruses that are lethal, and you don't want your baby to be inoculated with
C.
those.
diff is a huge thing that goes through hospitals.
Yep.
It's more often found in surgical type of environments, which your baby is part of
right.
when they're being born via cesarean, oftentimes. So it's just we're sharing this with you as just a recognizing the different ways that microbiomes can shift and change. And I actually, this was how I was first exposed to the microbiome before I had done even any of my training. I watched a documentary on functional medicine, the microbiome, gut health, and the first episode was about a baby born vaginally versus cesarean to the same mother. And how the first baby was born. Well, sorry, he wasn't born vaginally. He was born cesarean twice, or there were two cesarean sections that she had. The first baby was born cesarean, no seeding. The second section was born cesarean with seeding, which is where a woman can vaginally do a vaginal swab ahead of time. And then you can swab the baby afterwards. And she noticed a difference in the health of her children and progression and their health. And she's an MD as well. So she made these choices after learning.
So what did she notice?
That there was less sickness and less illness, a better ability to fight off infections and viruses in her second child that was seeded and swabbed.
Versus her first which
child.
Was not.
Yes. And the reason why she chose to seed her second child was because she had a lot of challenges with health with her first son.
And these were not twins. They were like two different births.
Two different babies. Yep, two different births.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. So one of the things that research paper came out with originally was what happens if we seed the babies that are being born via cesarean. And they actually put together a protocol to do this. And they wanted to do a test to determine if the babies were inoculated by this method, would the microbiome look more like their parents? And then taking it a step further, because now we know based on research that these moments at birth really do make a huge impact. They make such a big impact that they actually can affect the adult in that child. So when that child becomes 30, 40 years old, the choices that we make at birth actually can have an impact. We're seeing this now with the scientific data. But the protocol they put together was you get some sterile gauze and a sterile cup with a lid. And the idea is that you insert the gauze into the woman's vaginal canal, much like you would insert a tampon. The idea is you kind of want to have it there in place for about 2 hours, if possible, prior to the surgery. And this is obvious, but I'll state it. At this point, you also don't want to have any antibiotics going through the body. You would remove the gauze before you go into the surgical room, before any antibiotics are administered. And you put that gauze into the cup and you add saline solution and close that cup up. And you just leave it in the room until after the baby's born. Then after the baby is born, mom or partner can take that gauze and just kind of give them a little bit of a wipe down with it. So you would want to like wipe down their little face and around their mouth, of course, and their arms and their hands, because they'll put their arms and their hands in their mouth as well. And just kind of give their body a little rub down with this gauze that we collected. I've actually, because early on I saw this information, I actually was able to coach several of my clients through it. And I will say the hospital staff wasn't quite on board with the process. They definitely were not willing to administer this on their own, but they did allow it. So the position was, this is new data. We really don't know enough about it, and so we don't feel comfortable doing this, but you are welcome to do it if you want. So like if you bring the materials and you do it, go have at it, but we're not going to do it for you, which I really appreciate, because I understand that they have huge liability that they have to be careful of. But, being open to just letting us do it was awesome. But I will say that we did get a lot of funny looks also, like, what the hell?
Yeah.
What the hell are you guys doing?
I think you still might get some funny looks too. But again, it's one of your choices that you can make. And I just want to say here too that a cesarean is absolutely a way to deliver and to have a baby. And it can be a very beautiful birth experience. It can be very, very beautiful. And we're not here to say, like, have a vaginal birth, don't have a cesarean. Right. That is absolutely not what we say at all. You choose how you birth. We are just saying that there are benefits that you can see from a vaginal birth. And if you have the choice to make between the two, this is one of the pros of a vaginal birth, is that you can seed the microbiome. And if you have to have a cesarean, you have options to also seed to the best of the ability. And then after birth, too, if you're having a cesarean, you can use things like probiotics to build your baby's gut health. You can make sure that you are eating very well as you're breastfeeding your baby. Right. The breast milk can help build the baby's gut health as well. It has things called immunoglobulins in them. And actually, I think it's 80% of the milk is meant to feed the bacteria. It doesn't actually feed the baby. It feeds your baby's bacteria. It's so cool. So there's a good portion of the proteins that exist in breast milk that actually are not digestible by the human, but they are digestible by the bacteria. And so it's this perfect system where the body knows, okay, we have this new fresh human and they've just been inoculated with mom's microbiome. And then her milk feeds the microbiome to keep them going and keep them strong. It's much like your soil if you do gardening, right? So like you can create this rich, alive soil, but if you stop nourishing it, or if you stop feeding it with water and it dries out, all of that's going to die. It's living, right? It's all living. And so it's kind of the same concepts with human and animals and any other living thing. They have to be nourished and they have to be taken care of, and then they can grow and thrive. And the same is true for the bacteria and fungi and viruses of the microbiome. And so that's what the breast milk is doing, which is really cool to do. Phenomenal. Mm-hmm. It's freaking phenomenal. You cannot recreate breast milk. You can't. Yes. You can do as like you can't. You can recreate it as food, absolutely, and as being nutrients for the baby, but it's not going to be the same bacteria feeding aspect to it, which is what makes it unique, because it's unique to you and it's unique to your child as well. It's a really interesting concept. Right. Mm-hmm. And so you've had this beautiful vaginal birth, or you've had a wonderful cesarean, and then you seed your baby, and then you give a bath. What happens when you give a bath? So the hospital policy, if you birth in a hospital, is to give the babies a bath pretty quickly, usually within the first few hours, maybe the 4 hours or so, because a baby who has not been bathed yet, who is born vaginally, is considered like a bloodborne pathogen. And so the staff has to follow bloodborne pathogen protocols, which really in the end just means that they have to be cautious and they have to glove up whenever they're holding your newborn.
But they will often offer a bath right away. And it's one of those things where you're thinking, well, it's just a bath. No big deal. Sure. I mean, yeah, baby's messy, birth is messy, and it's just a bath. But it turns out that bath is more than just a bath. The bath is something that is taking away a big portion of that initial seeding and some of the mechanisms that are there to hold the seeding in place. So babies are born with vernix, which is like this waxy, white, creamy stuff. And it's amazing. It's also part of the process. If you rub that into your baby's skin, one is it creates like a little bit of a hydration protective barrier, much like our lotion. When we wear lotion, we're less ashy and less dry. Same thing for a baby. If you rub that in, it's kind of like a lotion. But it's also that waxy stickiness that the bacteria collect on. So like if you like dribbled a little bit of like extra virgin olive oil or something like that onto your carpet, you will notice over time that portion of your carpet collects the most yuck, right? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of that same thing. But in this case, it's collecting the good stuff. It's collecting all of those bacteria that we want on the baby. And so when we do that bath, we're washing all of that off. Not only are we washing the microbiome off and that yummy vernix that helps them stay hydrated, but we're also washing off a little bit of what mom and baby bond with. And one of the things they bond with that's super important is a smell. I've had women, this was like a little thing that I always wanted to ask my clients is like, what does your baby smell like? Because there is this unique communication between mom and a newborn that is happening through the nose. And for the mom, the baby usually has a very unique, wonderful smell. And we want mom and baby to, and it goes both ways. Baby also gets that from mom, but we want them to experience that. So the bath is also taking that piece of the bonding away.
And the olfactory system, which is your smell or your nose system, is the strongest sensory system in your body that you have. And as a baby too, these little babies don't see farther than a couple of fingers away or like a handprint away initially. And so that smell is a wonderful way for them to be able to connect with those around them.
Right.
And another thing about the bath too is, what soap are they using? It's the antimicrobial, antibacterial soap. So we're again just
harsh on the baby's skin,
fighting those germs off, but they're not germs; they're good bacteria.
Right,
that's what they are. So we've talked a little bit about baby being born in the microbiome, and so for those of us that are listening to this podcast, old enough to listen to this podcast, we were all born with seeding to some extent from our mother's microbiome, and how that impacts us throughout our lives it really just impacts our health throughout our lives too. Right. And then the choices that we make to add to the microbiome to support and grow and strengthen the microbiome or to weaken the microbiome can impact then where we sit when we choose to have children, to get pregnant, and then have our children and pass that microbiome along. So it is important to focus on our microbiome in the preconception period.
Yes.
If that's possible. And also during pregnancy, because if you're having that vaginal birth, you can give your child an amazing gift of that microbiome little present.
And we want it to be strong. We want it to be a strong microbiome. You know, one other thing to consider when we're talking about ensuring that pregnant person's microbiome is strong, it's not only to pass on to baby, which is, by the way, is hugely important, but there's other things that come up as well. So
for ourselves,
group beta strep, right? So for every woman, somewhere between 34 and 36 weeks, you will get a vaginal and anal swab, and they're testing. It's called GBS. They're testing for GBS, and they'll tell you, oh, you're GBS positive or you're GBS negative. Group beta strep is just something that is colonized in our gut, and sometimes the numbers get out of whack, and that's not a good thing. And so just focusing on nourishing yourself with whole foods, alive foods.
That would be fermentation, like sauerkraut, even kombucha, kefir, anything that's just fermented, yogurt,
creme fraiche with berries,
so yummy, and probiotics, specifically with a strain called Lactobacillus rhamnosus in it. That has proven to be helpful in fighting the group B strep bacteria, to not remove it from your microbiome, but to keep it in balance.
Yes.
Exactly. When it's out of balance is when it becomes a challenge.
Right.
And if you do come back positive for it, the standard of care protocol is to give you, I think it's 4 rounds they want to do of antibiotics while you're in labor.
Right.
And the reason behind that is because there is a small chance, and this is where I would ask that you do your own research as an empowered and informed parent. But there's a small chance that your child could, if they're birthed vaginally without having or antibiotics in labor, you having antibiotics in labor, that meningitis is a risk that can occur from getting group B strep. So that's why it's important to prevent group B strep as much as possible throughout your pregnancy and just in general in life, keeping yourself in balance.
And this is it's not an oopsie thing. It is something that we can have an effect on. It is something, as a pregnant person, that your diet and your lifestyle can keep it in a place where you don't have to make this hard decision. You don't have to go down this path.
And so when I'm working with women and clients in their second and third trimester specifically, we're focusing on whole foods diets, fermented foods, a good quality probiotic, things like ginger and garlic, like antibacterial type of herbs and things that you just eat as a regular meal, and low sugar.
Yes.
So decreasing your sugar content. I'm not saying get rid of food or get rid of fruit in your diet, but the things that were treats before, such as a couple of bowls of ice cream at night or the yogurt with the added sugar, those are things that you can absolutely change up in your diet. Like you could have Greek yogurt without the sugar, blend in some fruit as your sweetness treat or whatever, a couple chips of like dark chocolate. But you want to make sure that you're in balance because, one, those antibiotics are going to kill off the good bacteria as well as the bad bacteria.
Right.
So when you're seeding your child, they're not getting the good stuff that you've built up and you've tried to build up throughout pregnancy and before that from you. And then they also are impactful to you. And so your healing process postpartum is going to be more challenging than it would be if you didn't have to receive antibiotics.
And it also can affect that breastfeeding relationship.
Correct.
So, one of the things that's super common with a mama who has received a lot of antibiotics during her labor, postpartum, when mom and baby are trying to make that breastfeeding relationship, thrush ends up being a big issue for a lot of them.
And then that's more antibiotics oftentimes.
Right.
And I don't know if mastitis is correlated with this, but the same thing of why it's important to get and establish a good breastfeeding relationship, have a lactation consultant on hand if you need to call her or him. It's because you also, you can avoid things like mastitis. You can avoid antibiotics early on because you'll be taking them, then baby will be taking them too.
Right.
Antibiotics in general have a purpose.
Absolutely.
They have saved many, many lives. We overuse them now, though.
Well, I think we just came from a place where it was, the thing to do. Yeah. When in doubt, give antibiotics.
Yeah.
I don't know. We don't have the test results yet. We're not sure if this is bacterial infection or viral infection, but let's just get a head start on it and let's give the antibiotics. And it was really honestly naive thinking because we didn't know back then, antibiotics still being somewhat relatively new. We didn't know the impact that it could have on us, and we are starting to know now. And so you just have to kind of shift the thinking a little bit, and providers hopefully are starting to shift their thinking a little bit and not be so generous with the prescriptions of the
it's nice.
antibiotics.
You go to a doctor and you want to come out with something and you get a prescription for an antibiotic because that's also what they know to give you. I was listening the other day to someone and they brought up a good point. I mean this in the kindest way possible, but you go to a doctor that has gray hair. And likely they are going to be more well-versed around what works and what doesn't work, and they're going to be less likely just to hand out a script than someone that is young, new, fresh out of med
really?
school. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that's going to be shifting a little bit because we are getting into this generation, this age of medicine where people are learning to approach things more functionally and holistically, which is wonderful. We're almost coming back around full circle to where we were like 30s, 40s before antibiotics came about. But it was just an interesting thing that I was like, go to the old school, like German doctor versus the new school American doctor.
Because they saw before and after, they can kind of see the two. I get that. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, we'll probably do like a whole episode maybe on different choices that you have in birth and everything. But Group B strep is a great thing that you bring up about that in your microbiome. And there are a few, like we talked about whole foods, fermented foods, ideally just staying away from the recommendations of the standard American diet. That will do a lot for your microbiome if you just go the opposite way. And
just think about when you're looking at your foods, is this food fresh and alive, or is this food dead and maybe been sitting on a shelf for a long time? I think those are really very simple clues, right? Like fresh produce, fresh veggies, you can see that is fresh. Living things, usually they're refrigerated. Things that are on the shelves and they just sit there for extended period of time, those are usually dead and stale and lacking. And usually not so good for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more local, the better. Because the less time it has to move from one point to the other.
Right.
The more alive it is as well. And we're not saying they don't eat certain things because it's dead, like you've picked the green or something like that. But what we are saying is just be conscious about what you're eating. The brighter, the better.
Yes.
The more well-rounded the colors. I like eating the rainbow essentially can do a lot for your body. Eating seasonally can do a lot for your body as well. There are some great ways to fight off the bad bacteria and enhance the good without doing much except for putting something into your mouth and swallowing.
Right. Right. Just simple choices.
Yep. Very, very simple choices. So a couple other ways to support your microbiome. We talked about the nutrient-dense foods, balancing the bad bacteria, not just knocking it out. Even just being conscious with your choices that you're making around, like washing your hands, getting into the dirt. Those things are overwashing your hands isn't great for you. I'm just gonna say that. But
and this is big because we just came out of COVID.
I know. I'm trying to be very careful about what I say here. But I will tell you that my child, I will put him in the dirt and put him through a crowd before I will tell him to go wash his hands with bacteria or antibacterial soap or whatever. What is the hand sanitizer? That was like the biggest thing for a little while.
Well, here's what they found. Here's what the scientists have found. What makes up so yes, what you eat is important, but the primary things that make up your microbiome are going to be from what you inhale and from what you touch. And what you touch really does make up a big part of it. And so this is important. It could be good, it could be bad, but it's important, right? Exposure is important for the body.
It could also be the inhale piece of that. So working with your hands in the garden, that can get you really, really far with what you're touching because that's the touch piece of it. But the inhaling piece of it too, there is so much research around things such as forest bathing, going out into nature, not just, grounding on your feet is a thing of like stepping into the grass, but think about you're in a forest, you're breathing in the air, you're breathing in the microbiome of true nature of what it is. And that's also feeding the bacteria and feeding your gut and feeding your cells.
Which feeds your health.
Yeah, it feeds you emotionally, feeds you physically, feeds you in many, many ways.
Right.
One piece that I want to make sure we also talk about which I think that I don't think we've gotten to it yet, is the idea of being able to turn on and off genes with the microbiome. I love this phrase. This is like my phrase that I always like to share with people, is that genetics load the gun, but the environment and the lifestyle that you lead pulls the trigger. So that to say is, like, I could have a genetic predisposition to something such as, I'll just use myself as an example. So I had a genetic predisposition to MS, which they know there can be a genetic component to it. They just don't know exactly what it is yet. But my environment and my lifestyle pulled the trigger on me being diagnosed with that. So I knew that I wasn't eating well at that time. I had such high levels of stress. I had exposure to mold. I had certain vaccines, and all of this just popped. It popped the gun, the BB gun. And what it means is that you can be holding one of those genes. I could have been doing everything possible ahead of getting sick, that I never got sick because I didn't actually have the bad lifestyle or the bad environment around me that pulled that trigger.
So they used to think that when they finally finished mapping out the genome, they were like, okay, this is it. We know everything. And it turns out that was just a small piece of the puzzle. Really what happens is your environment and your lifestyle affects your microbiome. And the microbiome has the ability. So I used to be, the way I see it is more like a software engineer. I used to be a programmer. And so the way I see it is the microbiome has the ability to flip the switch, the 1 or the 0. So the gene can be there, but it does not have to be active. And so the microbiome can either make it active or it can make it inactive. Mm-hmm. And so this is huge.
And because that means that you can literally make choices in your life and your children's life to change the direction that they're going in health. Right. So your mother, God forbid this would ever be the thing, your grandmother has cancer, your mother has cancer, and you're like, well, I know I'm predisposed to cancer, or the gene that turns that on. You can make changes in your lifestyle before you get sick that can make that never happen.
Right.
And then you can pass that strength on to your child when you birth them. And then and the health and the choices that you make for them and that you teach them to make for themselves can then pass on to the next generation. So you are essentially influencing the health of generations to come.
Your whole line.
Yeah. And it's epigenetics, if you ever look into it. That's what it's called, is epigenetics. But this gives me goosebumps every single time I think about it and talk about it, because after my diagnosis, my first thought was, I don't want my child to even have to worry about this, to the point where I'm going to do everything that I can in my pregnancies and in my postpartum, in raising my child, to make decisions that it doesn't have to be worrisome for them.
Right.
And I want to just pass it to generations. And yeah, it's pretty cool.
I love that.
Yeah, very, very cool. So what we're getting at here, and the entirety summing up the podcast, is the microbiome is the launch pad of your immune system. It's the launch pad of your baby's immune system. It is one of the most influential ways that you can impact your own health in a positive manner, that you can impact the health of your children and generations to come. And you essentially are doing everything to train your immune system with your microbiome. So why not take care of it? And B is going to be recording an online class coming up.
Right. So coming soon, I will have a online class for pregnant women. So it'll be geared towards how to understand the microbiome, the basics, but then also how to go through your pregnancy with these kind of ideas in mind, and then what you need to know about birth and immediate postpartum. Not overly technical, should be very easy to consume, and not too long. So keep your eye out for that if you're interested in learning more. And you know what else I would love? I am not the breastfeeding expert, but I would love one on breastfeeding also.
Oh,
that would just
that'd
be
fantastic
great
to have that.
Yeah.
And we will, if this episode airs, for example, after that class is created, or if you're listening to this later on down the road, we'll update those show notes, hopefully, to be able to include that. Otherwise, you'll be able to always find information at Enzomama's website, which will always have included in this link. And then if you would like to work on your own microbiome in a more personalized manner and your health specifically, or the health of your little one, and preparing yourself for pregnancy, in pregnancy or postpartum, please reach out to me or find another health coach too. I am functionally trained. I'm a functionally certified health coach. So everything that I do is getting to the root of illness.
From the very beginning.
From the very beginning. So when
birth.
that's a really good point. So when I see a client, I'm even asking questions around, were you breastfed or bottle fed? Were you born vaginally, or were you born via cesarean? And when I worked at a functional clinic, in partnership with a functional doctor, the majority of our patients that were coming in for things like autoimmune diseases, hormone challenges, those were the main things that we would see. I think it was 2 people that I saw that were breastfed more than 6 months, and more than 6 months that came in. Wait, I'm saying this the wrong way. Basically, I just have in my mind from what I've seen is I saw one patient that came in that had been breastfed longer than 2 years. Everyone else had either been bottle fed or less than 6 months of breastfeeding, which was, it says a lot.
Eye-opening.
Very, very eye-opening. Most were born via
data.
cesarean as well. And I don't have the specific numbers looking back at all of that, but 80% were born via cesarean as well.
Wow.
So it just shows the importance of, if those choices have to be made, which there is absolutely a time and place for a cesarean section. And we are so, it's great that we have that in our medical repertoire. But there are things that you can do to support the health post-birth of your baby to build that immune system.
Right. Have the cesarean,
Yep.
but also be aware that they missed a step, and let's fill it in. Mm-hmm. It's so simple. It's such a simple darn thing.
And my clients that I have that have had cesareans, they have beautiful, thriving babies because they have taken the approach of focusing on their children's health, putting them first, like feeding them fermented foods when they can eat foods, feeding themselves fermented foods while breastfeeding, using probiotics, getting their kids in the dirt. And there is virtually no difference between their children.
Beautiful.
Cool.
Beautiful. Yep. Well, we can go on and on. For sure, I can go on and on about microbiome, but I think this is a good place to stop. Thank you for joining us for another episode, and hope to have you back. As always, if you have anything that you would love to hear from us about, or a topic that you would like us to dive into, please reach out, and we always love to hear from you. So shoot us a comment or an email. And until next time, stay happy and healthy.